Alright, today I'll be reading a poem, Howl, Parts 1 and 2 by Ginsberg. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities contemplating jazz, who bared their brains to heaven under the L and saw a Mohammedan angels staggering on tenement roofs illuminated, who passed through universities with radiant cool eyes, hallucinating Arkansas and Blake Light tragedy among the scholars of war, who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull, who cowered in unshaven rooms in underwear, burning their money in wastebaskets and listening to the terror through the wall, who got busted in their pubic beards running through the Laredo with a belt of marijuana for New York, who ate fire in paint hotels or drank turpentine in Paradise Alley, death, or purgatoried their torsos night after night, with dreams, with drugs, with waking nightmares, alcohol and cock and endless balls, incomparable, blind streets of shuddering cloud and lightning in the mind, leaving toward poles of Canada and Patterson, illuminating all the motionless world of time between coyotes, solidities of halls, backyard, green trees, cemetery, dawns, wine, drunkenness over the rooftop, storefront, burrows of tea-head, joyride, neon, blinking traffic light, sun and moon and tree vibrations in the roaring winter dusks of Brooklyn, ashcan rantings in the kind king light of mind, who chained themselves to subways for the endless ride from Battery to Holy Bronx on Benson Street until the noise of wheels and children brought them down, shuddering, mouth racked and battered, bleak of brain, all drained on brilliance in the drear light of Zoo, who sank all night in submarine light of Bickford's, floated out and sat through the stale beer afternoon in desolate Fugazis, listening to the crack of doom on the hydrogen jukebox, who talked continuously 70 hours from park to pad, to bar, to Bellevue, to museum, and to the Brooklyn Bridge, a lost battalion of platonic conversationalists jumping down the stoops off fire escapes, off windowsills of Empire State out of the moon, yakety yakking, screaming, vomiting, whispering facts and memories and anecdotes and eyeball kicks and shocks of hospitals and jails and wars, whole intellects disgorged in total recall for 7 days and nights with brilliant eyes, meet for the synagogue cast on the pavement, who vanished into nowhere Zen, New Jersey, leaving a trail of ambiguous picture postcards of Atlantic City Hall, suffering, Eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings and mind grindings of China under junk withdrawal in Newark's bleak furnished room, who wandered round and round at midnight in the railroad yard, wondering where to go and when, leaving no broken heart, who lit cigarettes in boxcars, racketing through snow towards lonesome farms in grandfather night, who studied Plotinus Poe, St. John of the Cross telepathy, and Bob Kablabla, because the cosmos instinctively vibrated at their feet in Kansas, who loaned it through the streets of Idaho seeking visionary Indian angels who were visionary Indian angels, who thought they were only mad when Baltimore gleamed in supernatural ecstasy, who jumped in limousines with the Chinamen of Oklahoma on the impulse of winter midnight streetlight small-town terrain, who lounged hungry and lonesome through Houston, seeking jazz or sex or soup, followed the brilliant Spaniard to converse about America and eternity, a hopeless tack, and so took ship to Africa, who disappeared into the volcanoes of Mexico, leaving behind nothing but the shadow of dungarees and the lava and ash of poetry scattered in fireplace Chicago, who reappeared on the West Coast, investigating the FBI in beers and shorts, with big pacifist eyes, sexy in their dark skin, passing out incomprehensible leaflets, who burned cigarette holes in their arms, protesting the narcotic tobacco haze of capitalism, who distributed super communist pamphlets in Union Square, weeping and undressing while the sirens of Los Alamos wailed them down, a wailed down wall, and the Staten Island ferry also wailed, who broke down crying in Waite gymnasiums, naked and trembling before the machinery of other skeletons, who bit detectives in the neck and shrieked with delight in police cars for committing no crime with their own wild cooking pederasty and the intoxication, who howled on their knees in the subway and were dragged off the roof, waving genitals and manuscripts, who let themselves be fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists who screamed with joy, who blew and were blown by these by those superhuman seraphim, the sailors, caresses of Atlantic and Caribbean love, who bawled in the morning and the evenings in rose gardens and the grass of public parks and cemeteries, scattering their semen freely to whomever come who may, who hiccuped endlessly trying to giggle but wound up with a sob behind a partition in Turkish bath when the blonde and naked angel came to pierce them with a sword, who lost their love boys to the three old shrews of fate, the one-eyed shrew with the heterosexual dollar, the one-eyed shrew that winks out the womb, and the one-eyed shrew that does nothing but sit on her ass and snip the intellectual golden threads of the craftsman's loom, who copulated ecstatic and insatiate with a bottle of beer, a sweetheart, a package of cigarettes, a candle, and fell off the bed, and continued along the floor and down the hall, and ended fainting on the wall with a vision of ultimate cunt and cum eluding the last jism of consciousness, who sweetened the snatches of a million girls trembling in the sunset, and were red-eyed in the morning, were prepared to sweeten the snatch of the sunrise, flashing buttocks under barns and naked in the lake, who went out whoring through Colorado in myriad stolen night cars. N.C. secret hero of the poem, Coxman and Adonis of Denver, joy to the memory of his innumerable ladies of girls in empty lots and diner backyards, movie houses, rickety rows, and on mountain tops and caves, or with gaunt waitresses and familiar roadside lonely petticoat upliftings, and especially secret gas station solipsism of Johns and hometown alleys too, who faded out in vast sordid movies, were shifted in dreams, woke on a sudden Manhattan, and picked themselves up out of the basement hung over with heartless decay and horrors of Third Avenue iron dreams, and stumbled to unemployment offices, who walked all night with their shoes full of blood on the snowbank docks, waiting for a door in the East River to open to a room full of steam heat and opium, who created great suicidal dramas on the apartment cliffbanks of the Hudson under the wartime blue floodlight and the moon, and their heads shall be crowned with laurel in oblivion, who ate the lamb stew of the imagination or digested the crab at the muddy bottom of the rivers of Bowery, who wept at the romance of the streets with their pushcarts full of onions and bad music, who sat in boxes breathing in the darkness under the bridge, and rose up, and rose up, and rose up to build harpsichords in their lofts, who coughed on the sixth floor of the Harlem Crown with flame under the tubercular sky surrounded by orange crates of theology, who scribbled all night rocking and rolling over lofty incantations, which in the yellow morning were stanzas of gibberish, who cooked rotten animals along Hartfield tail borched and tortillas dreaming of the pure vegetable kingdom, who plunged themselves under the meat trucks looking for an egg, who threw their watches off the roof to cast their ballot for eternity outside of time, and alarm clocks fell on their heads every day for the next decade, who cut their wrists 3 times unsuccessfully, gave up, and were forced to open antique stores where they thought they were growing old and cried, who were burned alive in their innocent flannel suits on Madison Avenue, amid blasts of leading verse and tanked-up clatter of the iron regiments of fashion and the nitroglycerin shriek of the fairies of advertising and the mustard gas of sinister intelligent editors, or were run down by the drunken taxicabs of absolute reality, who jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge. This actually happened and walked away unknown and forgotten into the ghostly days of Chinatown. The ghostly days of Chinatown, soup alleyways and fire trucks, not even one free beer, who sang out of their windows in despair, fell out of the subway window, jumped into filthy Passaic, leaped on Negroes, cried all over the street, danced on broken wine glasses, barefoot, smashed phonograph records of nostalgic European 1930s German jazz, finished the whiskey and threw up groaning into the bloody toilet. Moans in their ears and the blast of colossal steam whistles, who barreled down the highways of the past, journeying to the each other's hot rod Golgotha, jail solitude watch, or Birmingham jazz incarnation, who drove cross country 72 hours to find out if I had a vision, or you had a vision, or he had a vision to find out eternity, who journeyed to Denver, who died in Denver, who came back to Denver and waited in vain, who watched over Denver and brooded and loaned into Denver, and finally went away to find out the time, and now Denver is lonesome for her heroes, who fell on their knees in hopeless cathedrals, praying for each other's salvation and light and breasts, until the soul illuminated its hair for a second, who crashed through their minds in jail waiting for impossible criminals with golden heads and a charm of reality in their hearts, who sang sweet blues to Alcatraz, retired to Mexico to cultivate a habit, or Rocky Mount to tender Buddha, or Tanglers to boys, or Southern Pacific to the Black Locomotive, or Harvard to Narcissus, to Woodlawn to the Daisy Chain or Grave, who demanded sanity trials, accusing their radio of hypnotism, and were left with their insanity in their hands in a hung jury, who threw potato salad at CCNY lecturers on Dadaism, and subsequently presented themselves on the granite steps of the madhouse with shaven heads and harlequin speech of suicide, demanding instantaneous lobotomy, and who were given instead the concrete void of insulin, metrazole, electricity, hydrotherapy, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, ping pong, and amnesia, who, in humorless protest, turned over one symbolic ping pong table, resting briefly in catatonia. Returning years later, truly bald except for the wig of blood and tears and fingers to the visible madman doing with the words of the mad towns of the East. Pilgrim states, rocklands, and great towns floated halls, bickering with the echoes of his soul, rocking and rolling in the midnight solitude, benched dolmen, realms of love, dream of life and nightmare, bodies turned to stone as the heavy as moon. With mother finally, and the last fantastic book flung out of the tenement window, the last door closed at 4 a.m., and the last telephone slammed at the wall in reply, the last furnished room emptied down to the last piece of mental furniture, a yellow paper rose twisted on a higher hanger in the closet, and even that imaginary nothing but a hopeful little bit of hallucination. Ah, Carl, while you are not safe, I am not safe, and now you're really in the total animal soup of time. And who therefore ran through the icy streets, obsessed with a sudden flash of the alchemy of the use of the ellipse, the catalog, the meter, and the vibrating plane, who dreamt and made incarnate gaps in time and space through images juxtaposed, and traps the archangel of the soul between two visual images, and joined the elemental verbs, and set the noun and dash of consciousness together, jumping with sensation of Pater Omnipotens Aeterno Deus, to recreate the syntax and measure of pure human prose, and stand before you speechless and intelligent, shaken with shame, rejected yet confessing out the soul, to conform to the rhythm of thought in his naked and endless head. The madman, bum, and angel beat in time, unknown yet putting down here, what might be left to say, come after death, and rose reincarnate in the ghastly clothes of jazz in the gold horned shadow of the band, and blew the suffering of America's naked mind for love. To an Eli Lama Sabachi saxophone cry that shivered cities down to the last radio. With the absolute heart and the poem of life butchered of their own bodies, good to eat 1,000 years. 2. What sphinx of cement and aluminum bashed open their skulls and ate up their brains and imagination? Moloch, solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans and unobtainable dollars, children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy judger of men, Moloch the incomprehensible prison, Moloch the crossbones soulless jailhouse and Congress of sorrows, Moloch whose buildings are judgment, Moloch the vast stone of war, Moloch the stunned governments, Moloch whose mind is pure machinery, Moloch whose blood is running money, Moloch whose fingers are 10 armies, Moloch whose breast is cannonball dynamo, Moloch whose ear is a smoking tomb, Moloch whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows, Moloch whose skyscrapers stand in the long streets like endless Jehovahs, Moloch whose factories dream and croak in the fog, Moloch whose smokestacks and antennae to crown the cities, Moloch whose love is endless oil and stone, Moloch whose soul is electricity and banks, Moloch whose poverty is a spectre of genius, Moloch whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen, Moloch whose name is the mind, Moloch in whom I sit lonely, Moloch in whom I dream angels, crazy in Moloch, cocksucker in Moloch, lack love and manless in Moloch, Moloch who entered my soul early, Moloch in whom I am a consciousness without a body, Moloch who frightened me out of my natural ecstasy, Moloch whom I abandoned. Wake up in Moloch, light streaming out of the sky. Moloch, Moloch, robot apartments, invisible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, demonic industries, spectral nations, invincible madhouses, granite cocks, monstrous bombs. They broke their backs, lifting Moloch to heaven. Pavements, trees, radios, tons, lifting the city to heaven which exists and is everywhere about us. Visions, omens, hallucinations, miracles, ecstasies, gone down to the American River, dreams, adorations, illuminations, religions, the whole boatload of sensitive bullshit, breakthroughs over the river, flips and crucifixions, gone down the flood. Highs, epiphanies, despairs, 10 years, animal screams and suicides, minds, new loves, mad generation, down on the rocks of time, real holy laughter in the river. They saw it all, the wild eyes, the holy yells. They bade farewell. They jumped off the roof to solitude, waving, carrying flowers, down to the river into the street.